This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to the Trump administration's intensifying attacks on cultural institutions and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, including the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. In February, President Trump ousted the center's longtime chair, David Rubenstein, made himself chair of the board. Trump also fired longtime president Deborah Rutter. Last week, the Kennedy Center fired at least 7 members of its social impact initiative, including its vice president, artistic director, the renowned artist Marc Bamuthi Joseph. The team aimed to expand the Art Center's reach to diverse audiences, to commission new works by Black composers. The job terminations come weeks after President Trump took over the Kennedy Center and also appointed his allies, including his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, to the board, and her mother, and Second Lady Usha Vance, and 2 hosts on Fox News, Laura Ingraham and Maria Bartiromo. Marc Bamuthi Joseph recorded this video from his office just after he was fired.
Well, I am sitting in my office at the Kennedy Center one last time. It's funny, I'm taking things down like this red, black, and green American flag and this extraordinary piece of artwork that my man Greg made that honors Stevie Wonder, and this poster from BAM, and a commemorative album that was organized by Swiss Beats. Basically, I'm taking down everything Black in my office, just as the new leadership of the Kennedy Center is doing its best to disavow much of the literal color that has made this place special. I'm grieving and angry and also ready to be rid of the moral injury that has come with being in this place. It's hard to say goodbye, but it isn't hard to say goodbye to an oppressive situation. So may liberation be my liturgy. I'm proud of what we made here. We will always have an impact.
Marc Bamuthi Joseph, speaking after he was fired as vice president and artistic director of social impact at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, the last time he was in his office. And this is a portion from Marc Bamuthi Joseph's spoken word performance Friday, when he went back to Oakland for a timely production with the Oakland Symphony titled The Forgiveness Suite, accompanied by musician Daniel Bernard Remain.
Steps to grace. Face the hurt. Unthread the truth. Choose mercy. Engage your transgressor. Say, I leave this pain with you. Grace requires a loosening of other people's stuff for American socialized Black girls who considered shame reflexively when self-love wasn't enough. Grace is never enough when the forgiveness isn't deserved. But here you are, facing the truth, reconciling the pain by extending grace.
You've been listening to Marc Bamuthi Joseph. He joins us right now from Virginia. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Bamuthi. Talk about what happened last week. Talk about what's happening to the Kennedy Center.
Peace, Amy. Good morning to you, and good morning to everyone listening and watching. I feel so privileged to be the child of immigrants, and having lived in the state of California for a long time, moving to D.C. infused me with a different sense of patriotism and connection to the American promise, to the plurality that makes this country truly great. There has been, as you've distilled, an infusion of a kind of binary political discourse into what's supposed to be a sanctuary for freedom of thought and freedom of creative expression. The Kennedy Center, it should be said, has not officially canceled any performances or explicitly, contractually remove themselves from relationship to any artist. But as you've been describing so diligently and so bravely over the course of your entire career, we create atmosphere through rhetoric. The stated agenda, as institutionalized in spaces like the National Endowment for the Arts, let's say, severely restricts and almost criminalizes demographic realities outside of white, straight, male Christianity. The specific attack on gay, trans, and drag performers has narrowed the cultural radius at the Kennedy Center significantly, so that artists feel like they can't, in good conscience, come to the Kennedy Center. So you're seeing artists like Issa Rae or the producers of Hamilton or the artists Rhiannon Giddens remove themselves from their relationship to the Kennedy Center. And that in turn trickles down to the brave staff who are arts professionals who care about cultural providence and have to do their very best to make it possible for artists to continue to be at their best. But against the backdrop of this oppressive regime and this politically narrow board of directors, that's extraordinarily difficult to do.
I mean, you have this unbelievable moment that we just played. John Batiste playing Star Spangled Banner. President Trump is saluting at the Super Bowl, and he had just fired him from the board of trustees of the Kennedy Center, along with many others. And then John F. Kennedy, you've got the portrait there in the John F. Kennedy Performing Arts Center. And when he came for his board meeting, President Trump as chair, what he put up new portraits, himself, his wife, Usha Vance, and Vice President Vance.
Yeah, you know, what you're seeing all over government are folks who aren't necessarily experienced in the lines or departments or vectors of action that they're supposed to lead. And there is no formal experience in either nonprofits, arts management, or the art of curation that is now present at the top of the organizational chart, beginning with the board chair. So, you know, the desire to satisfy, you know, one's ego, or the desire to be vengeful, apparently has superseded the desire to serve this nation in terms of making safe space for artists, particularly artists from historically marginalized communities or historically minoritized communities, to thrive. The work that we did in social impact, and I'm so proud of my team, my staff, and all of my colleagues who supported us, you know, that work was meant to focus on the historically marginalized, but also it connected to this idea of the constitutionality of inspiration. Our belief is that you cannot have access to the franchise, to the American franchise, if you don't have access to the impulse of creativity. That just like you have access to the ballot box or under equal protection under the law, under the 14th Amendment, you also have access and protection to inspiration. How can you be an American if you cannot hope? And who authors hope more than artists? So this diminishment of creativity, of ideas, the diminishment of folks' access to high-level inspired works of art is among the more un-American things I think that a leader would do.
During your time there, Marc Bamuthi Joseph, you helped launch the Culture Caucus, which offered 2-year residencies with groups that work with queer and trans youth, formerly incarcerated people, the disabled community. You also established a national partnership called Conflux, which worked with the National Arab Orchestra, the First Nations community, and World Pride. Your audience, mainly wealthy and white. And can you talk about the direction that Trump is now taking the Performing Arts Center in? We heard from Steve Bannon, one of his allies, that he had spoken to Rick Gurnell, the new head of the Kennedy Center, that they're going to be bringing one of the first performances, the January 6th choir, to perform there, to usher in a new era of culture in the new Kennedy Center.
Yeah, I won't speak to the president's curatorial tastes. They speak for themselves. I think maybe what I would point to is the list of maybe more than 200 musicians who didn't want their music played at his rallies. That speaks to a broader environment, I think, and disconnect between the arts community and the political direction of the president of the United States. All the work that you cited, that's the work that we stand on and that we're proud of. You know, your listeners and your viewers know going out to have a date night or a family night is increasingly expensive. Parking and food and, not to mention the cost of the tickets themselves, childcare. A lot of the work that we did was we lowered the barrier to entry from a financial standpoint, but also from a social standpoint. You know, my folks always want to know who all gonna be there, right? Well, what we did in social impact was we helped usher in a culture of invitation. The Kennedy Center, historically, at its best, produces more than 2,000 events a year. So maybe less than focus on what happens curatorially. I think we all have to ask ourselves how many artists are willing to come into a space with such a narrow field of cultural vision. What is the scale of the Kennedy Center going to be like 6 months from now or a year from now? What happens inside the building is only as powerful as the people and the artists within it. So, God bless all the curators at the Kennedy Center, but maybe more importantly, God bless the artists who now have perhaps one less venue to share their work with the world, and then God bless the audiences. Because audiences or, American citizens, folks who have less access to inspiration erode the democracy from the point of a lack of sight onto the creative horizon.
I wanted to also ask you, Bamuthi, about Trump's executive order signed last week appointing the vice president, J.D. Vance, to eliminate, quote, divisive race-centered ideology, unquote, from Smithsonian Museums, research centers, and the National Zoo. The order, called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, aims to remove exhibits and programs that portray U.S. history and values as inherently harmful and oppressive, unquote. It cites, in particular, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which opened in 2016. The Smithsonian operates independently since it was established as a public-private partnership by Congress in 1846, but roughly receives 60% of its funding from the federal government. You're an Oakland guy, but you've moved to Washington for your job that you were just fired from, and I'm sure you've spent time at the African American Museum. The significance of putting Vance in charge of deciding what exhibits are appropriate or not, what is American or not?
Yeah. Yeah. It is chilling. It is a harbinger. It is a signifier in the most ominous of terms. I think about the words of John F. Kennedy inscribed on the wall at the Kennedy Center. Kennedy spoke of an America that was unafraid of grace and beauty. I think about the writers and the teachers who made me. Everyone from Dr. Daniel Omatosho Black at Clark Atlanta University to the author Toni Morrison, the poet Nikki Giovanni. I think about how they all authored the story of our overcoming. America is actually built on struggle. And, you know, it's obviously impossible to decouple American history from a genocidal, hyper-patriarchal, hyper-capitalist frame and origin story. But the idea of democracy itself is a radical idea. The Constitution itself is a critical theory. It describes a way, a populist way that requires participation in order to actually make the country thrive. In order to fully participate in the democracy, you have to sublimate or suppress your apathy. My partners at Sozo Artists and I think about the idea that the way to turn apathy into empathy is to infuse inspiration as a conversion element. These museums, these Smithsonian museums, inspire folks because they distill the story of our overcoming. You enter, even if you entered one of the Smithsonian institutions apathetic as to the idea of struggle or overcoming, you are inspired inside of that institution and you leave a more compassionate and more empathetic human being. So, you know, this description of what the Smithsonian institutions do, particularly, you know, what we call the Blacksonian here locally, you know, that description is severely un-American and disconnected from the American promise. But maybe more critically, it minimizes the opportunity to generate empathy among not only the citizens of this country, but visitors from all over the world.
Marc Bamuthi Joseph, I want to thank you so much for being with us. Renowned artist and playwright, fired from his role as vice president and artistic director of the Kennedy Center's Social Impact Initiative.